afternoon, everyone. How are you? Welcome to this beautiful Lindenwood University and this really cool event. It's one of the first of its kind here. I know there have been previous events here before, but this is going to be really something special. And I think last time I was in this beautiful auditorium, I was seeing Aaron Bodie. It speaks to the diversity of this university and all that it entertains. And really appreciate you being here. The fact of the matter is, it's beautiful that something so wrong with the world can create something so right in terms of having two very divergent personalities, two previously divergent philosophies on the same stage today to have a vigorous discussion about what is at hand here. Ralph Nader and Grover Norquist on the emerging left-right alliance to dismantle the corporate state. And of course, we're in that situation right now. I just recently covered this morning on the Allman in the Morning show. My name is Jamie Allman, by the way, and do the Allman in the Morning show and the Allman Report. And we were talking about the Republicans and Democrats and people working together to cut food stamps. And I was thinking, well, that's all great and good, but you're going after low-hanging fruit. I know there's a discussion about whether the government should be involved in food stamps and that kind of thing, but if they're going to be stealing my tax money, I'd rather go to food stamps and corporate welfare, to tell you the truth. And so we had that discussion. So there's a lot of different kind of ideas out here that are going beyond the parties, and I think that's great, and tonight you're going to see that in full swing. This is hosted by the brand new Hammond Institute for Free Enterprise and, of course, FM News Talk 97.1. I would like to introduce right now the esteemed president of this esteemed university, President Dr. James Evans.
Thank you, Jamie, and welcome to this very special event at the beautiful J. Scheidegger Center. We're pleased to have you with us, and we think you will enjoy and learn from the presentations and discussion and debate that you will hear from two of the best-known authorities on the politics of economics. The discussion will address the general topic of crony capitalism from divergent perspectives, of course, and who knows where that will lead us. For Lindenwood, I want to thank not only our two distinguished guest panelists, but also Mr. Allman of radio station FM 97.1, our distinguished MC, and former Missouri Speaker of the House, Tim Jones, who will be our moderator today. This special event is one in a series of timely presentations brought by the Hammond Institute for Free Enterprise of Lindenwood University. Now I will turn the microphone back over to our MC, Mr. Allman.
All right, of the many seeds that have been watered here at Lindenwood, one of the trees that has grown is a brand new center. It's called the Liberty and Ethics Center at Lindenwood. It's brand new, it's really cool, and here to talk more about it is Dr. Rachel Duchant, the director of the Liberty and Ethics Center here at Lindenwood.
Hello, I'm Rachel Duchant, Director of the Liberty and Ethics Center, as Jamie said, and I'm also Associate Professor of Philosophy here at Lindenwood. I want to thank Dr. Evans especially for his selfless and invaluable service to this university because he is retiring this summer, and we will miss him very much. The Hammond Institute for Free Enterprise is housed in the School of Business and Entrepreneurship here at Lindenwood. Its mission is to foster free enterprise and civil and religious liberty through the examination of market-oriented approaches to economic and social issues. This mission is based on the view that a limited government, such as that laid out in the constitutional foundation of the United States, is a necessary component of a just and prosperous society. My colleague, Dr. Howard Wall, who is where? If you want to wave, Howard Wall over there, directs both the Institute itself and the Center for Economics and the Environment, which focuses on policy-oriented research on the natural business and economic environments. And my colleague David Rosenwasser is here somewhere, and he directs the DeRee Center for Entrepreneurship, which seeks to inspire and support the entrepreneurial spirit in Lindenwood students and the larger community by creating, nurturing, and advancing entrepreneurial endeavors through long-term mentorship, partnership, and internship. And finally, I direct the Liberty and Ethics Center, which fosters scholarship on the roles of free enterprise and liberty in advancing the virtues necessary for a society that is both prosperous and just. Dr. Wall often refers to the tripartite nature of the Hammond Institute as the head, the hands, and the heart. Our presentation today serves as the keynote event for a conference called Capitalism, Crony Capitalism, and the Common Good, which runs over all day tomorrow and on Saturday. If you look at the backs of your programs, if you just flip them over, you'll see the full schedule there. All of the talks are free and open to the public. Please feel free to join us for one, some, or all of those presentations. Capitalism is a controversial word. For some, the connotation is entirely positive. They associate the term with efficiency, positive incentives, and economic growth. For others, the connotation is entirely negative. They associate the term with an unacceptable level of inequality, with exploitation, and conspicuous consumption. One of our tasks over the next 3 days is to distinguish between the capitalism of the first group and the capitalism of the second. One is based on the institutions of private property and peaceful exchange, while the other, one might argue, arises from a manipulation of the political system by business entities to protect themselves from the vicissitudes of the market. This system of log rolling and pork barrel spending for protectionism, subsidies, and overregulation spreads so that other market participants are dragged into it, even against their will, out of a sense of self-preservation. The question arises for us this weekend then, if we can, and how we do, untangle the web of cronyism in which we are now trapped. I hope you'll join us for some or all of that discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Doctor. Appreciate it very much. And now on to the program. President Evans, thank you very much for all you're doing for this school, and we will indeed miss you for sure. So we have two esteemed panelists. Both of them have been warriors throughout history in terms of politics and philosophy and getting their hands dirty in Washington, D.C. Our first panelist is Grover Norquist. He's president of the Americans for Tax Reform, a taxpayer advocacy group he founded in '85 at President Reagan's request. Now, ATR works to limit the size and the cost of government. Obviously opposes higher taxes at the federal, state, and local levels, and supports tax reform that moves towards taxing consumed income one time at one rate. Mr. Norquist is the author of the forthcoming book, End the IRS Before It Ends Us: How to Restore a Low-Tax, High-Growth, Wealthy America. Arianna Huffington, by the way, calls Mr. Norquist the dark wizard of the right's anti-tax cult. So those are nice descriptions for our friend, Mr. Norquist. I didn't want to tell Ralph Nader that I drove my old Corvair here. I didn't want to. No, thanks to him, I still can't find one. So that's okay, though. I grew up admiring him and his spunk and his spirit. Consumer advocate, lawyer, and author Ralph Nader. In his career as consumer advocate, he founded many organizations, including the Center for Study of Responsive Law, the Public Interest Research Group, the Center for Auto Safety, Public Citizen, which is a great organization, by the way, Clean Water Action Project, the Disability Rights Center, the Pension Rights Center, the Project for Corporate Responsibility, and the Multinational Monitor, which is a monthly magazine. His latest book is indeed the inspiration for today's event. It's titled Unstoppable: The Emerging Left-Right Alliance to Dismantle the Corporate State. Mr. Nader, welcome. Appreciate you being here. Our moderator tonight is Tim Jones. He is the former Republican House Speaker, longtime friend of mine, good guy, another guy who has a passion for getting his hands dirty and a passion for the fight. And tonight he's going to be moderating a discussion between two Well, previously divergent philosophies now coming together to try to solve some of the problems that are hampering our government and indeed our tax structure at this time. Please welcome former House Speaker Tim Jones.
Thank you, Jamie. Thank you very much. And good evening, good afternoon, and welcome to all of you. I am Tim Jones. I am the, as my wife says, her favorite title, the former House Speaker of the Missouri House. She and my daughters enjoy having me around a little bit more, and I'm happy to be back in the St. Louis region, working side by side now on a pretty daily basis with my good friend Jamie Allman, my good friends at 97.1, and hopefully you have all caught, and if you have not, you can now catch it tonight, Jamie's brand new show, The Allman Report, which is on ABC 30 every evening at 5 and 10. So if you haven't gotten enough of Jamie and I today, you can listen to us on the radio and on television and just carry us with you everywhere you go. I was very excited about this event because these are two gentlemen that I have definitely followed throughout most of my career, dating back to my college days and up through my political life, and I found them both to be incredibly fascinating. I've had the opportunity to work very closely with Grover Norquist on some tax policy issues here in the state of Missouri, and also have been always interested in Mr. Nader as well, and his divergent philosophies. I found it fascinating the two of them were going to sit side by side on a stage and discuss an event that they have found truly a left-right alliance on. And that is dealing with an issue that every state legislature in the country and the federal government wrestles with every single day. Every single public servant, every elected official has to deal with this issue at some time, and many of them deal with this issue every day. You know, we on the right and the conservative wing typically talk about welfare and social programs under one auspice, but in recent years, this idea of corporate welfare has definitely entered into the dialogue, and many view it to be just as dangerous. But for those of the Republican Party, many of them have yet to fully understand exactly what it is, how it operates, and why it is just as dangerous as some of the entitlement programs that those on the right have fought against for years. So, therefore, we have very much a cutting-edge issue, the emerging left-right alliance dealing with some call it crony capitalism, some call it crony corporatism. It has many names, and we're going to delve deeper into it and learn what it is today. Both of our featured guests are going to give some opening remarks to sort of set the stage from their divergent viewpoints and show how those viewpoints cross here today. And then I will return and moderate the discussion and dig deeper into some details. Following that, we will have some opportunity to hear from you. We want to hear from you. We want to hear your questions. And so Dr. Wall is up here in the front of the audience. He is up here to my right, your left. And if you would like to bring questions to him, we only have a limited period of time for questions, so he's going to call through them and use his professorial wisdom to determine what are the most interesting questions, the most challenging questions for our panelists. And then after that, Jamie will be back with some very important announcements, so stay seated till the very end to talk about some upcoming opportunities following this event relating to Mr. Nader's book. So Grover pointed out to me that Ralph Nader wrote the book on this, literally, and so he is going to go first. So Mr. Nader, we will start with you.
Thank you, Mr. Jones, Mr. Norquist, and ladies and gentlemen. The genesis, I think, of this symposium is an increased interaction between left and right all over the country. The powers that be for centuries have liked to divide and rule left and right about the areas they actually disagree on, and they do disagree. There's no sugarcoating that. They disagree on things like regulation, taxes, reproductive rights, school prayer, gun control, etc. But the areas of agreement are massive and diverse. In my book, Unstoppable, I have 24 areas of convergence in terms of public opinion, that is, polls, and then some of them are going operational into the political, electoral arena, and some of them have actually been enacted. Juvenile justice reform has been enacted in 15 states, and only because Republican and Democratic legislatures got together to make it happen. Grover, Norquist, and Newt Gingrich and others have started a group called Right on Crime to join with liberal and progressive prison reformers to challenge the incarceration of hundreds of thousands of people at huge taxpayer expense for long sentences for nonviolent transgressions. It's also going operational in an area maybe that Grover disagrees with, and that is restoring the minimum wage to what it would have been adjusted for inflation starting in 1968. That would be now $11 an hour, federal minimum wage, which is stuck at $7.25. That comes in 70 to 80%. That is widely supported among workers who call themselves conservatives in Walmart and elsewhere, but it has reached operational results in a number of cities and a number of states that have raised the minimum wage higher than the federal. It is yet to reach Congress, Capitol Hill, which we call Wuthering Heights these days. The other areas imply not a unanimity of left-right, but enough to make an unstoppable majority. In the House of Representatives now, there is a majority of Republican and Democrats opposed to the corporate-managed, sovereignty-shredding, job-exporting, so-called trade agreements that go beyond trade and subordinate consumer, worker, and environmental standards to the imperatives of trade, all in enormous secrecy, with the final decisions made by secret, literally, secret tribunals in Geneva, Switzerland, or elsewhere. That's going to be a big battle in the next 2 months as President Obama, with Republican support, is going to try to get fast-track procedures through so they can send the Trans-Pacific Trade Agreement to Congress with no amendments permitted under limited debate. There's also a left-right convergence. I worked with Ron Paul on this, on the civil liberties violations of the Patriot Act and the lack of due process that is given, that is denied people with funny-sounding names in our country. This is a wide area against NSA snooping, against invading privacy. That comes in very high in the polls. Right now, under federal law, a federal agent can search your home and not have to tell you for 72 hours. That's not the America that a lot of liberals and conservatives thought they grew up in. There's also a left-right alliance against big banks that are too big to fail. Too big to fail, George Will says, means they should be too big to exist. And so it comes in about 90% to break up the big banks that are too big to fail and therefore have to be bailed out by the taxpayer. The Wall Street bailout was really the signal development in the last 10 years, trillions of dollars of a variety of corporate welfare bailouts. And corporate welfare comes in many ways. It comes in terms of outright cash to corporations, certain corporations. It comes in the way of privileges and immunities from law enforcement. It comes in the way of loan guarantees. The nuclear industry couldn't exist without 100% loan guarantees for new nuclear plants because Wall Street thinks they're too risky for private loans, so they want Uncle Sam to be the loan guarantor. There's a huge amount of research and development, which we all pay for, that significantly built the aerospace industry, the biotech industry, the computer internet industry, the containerization industry, a lot of the pharmaceutical industry. These were research done with taxpayer funding at the National Institutes of Health, National Cancer Institute, the Space Agency, NASA, Defense Department, R&D. It's often said that the Defense Department's basic research helped develop the internet. There are a lot of other areas of corporate welfare. It's a very complex area, but it really comes down to taxpayers giving important monies and assets to corporations with very little in return to bail them out or to make them richer or to fix their mistakes. And when the big corporations have this kind of influence in Washington, it's not just taxpayers that are disadvantaged. It's small business. It's unfair competition vis-a-vis small business. And it's not just small business, it's all of us who own the Commonwealth property of the United States. We own the public lands, 1/3 of America. We own the public airwaves. We own a lot of this research and development coming out of Washington, but we don't control its disbursement. It's controlled very heavily by corporations, the timber companies, the oil and gas companies, the coal companies, the gold and silver industry. Most people in colleges, and I count my college as well, and law schools, never really study corporate welfare. They don't study crony capitalism. They don't study the merger of big business and big government against the public interest. You may speculate as to why they don't, but it's a very controversial issue and it offends powerful and wealthy interests. Maybe that explains it. Also, there aren't all that many jobs after you graduate if you specialize in challenging corporate welfare. That doesn't look good on your resume. Now, what is going on in Congress and the state legislature is quite interesting. Some of these 24 areas in the book have gone operational. I mentioned the Trans-Pacific, I mentioned juvenile justice, but there has been some timid efforts to set up commissions to investigate corporate welfare and recommend which ones should be abandoned. John McCain had a commission proposal. He put it in about 4 years ago. It didn't go anywhere, didn't even have hearings, and he never reintroduced it. In the House of Representatives, a Republican and Democrat member of the House, they put in a commission in 2010. It never went anywhere. They didn't reintroduce it. We first testified together, Grover and I, over 15 years ago before John Kasich, Republican chair of the House Budget Committee, who held the first congressional hearing on crony capitalism or corporate welfare in American history. To give you an idea, it's nothing new. The federal government gave a railroad company 40 million acres to build a railroad in the northern tier of the United States to Washington State. 40 million acres is 12 times the size of Connecticut. You don't need that many acres to build a railroad, but they were given huge areas of forest, which they have exploited as a massive windfall for what the government overgave them. And so this has been going on a long time, but it's maturing into a metastasized corporate state, corporate socialism, crony capitalism, whatever you think about it. The problem with it is that the groups who are on the same side, like Heritage Foundation, Cato, Economic Policy Institute, Public Citizen, Common Cause, left, right, that's not their top priority. Their priority is fighting each other over issues of significance that they get their funding from. And so it's never anybody's top priority, which is why I recommend the establishment of nonprofit advocacy groups whose only mission is to foster convergence into reality so we can get something done in this country, so we can improve our country with an unstoppable majority of left and right. That's the goal we have, and I've said to Grover, I'll fund one full-time person. If he funds one full-time person, we'll start a squeaky little group in Washington that will grow into a transformation of the political alignment in this country, which is basically built on endemic conflict rather than chronic convergence. Last point I want to make is the issue of foreign and military policy. This isn't areas that we're known for working in, Grover and I, but I think we agree that empire is out of control, that we have what Ed Crane, the head of the Cato Institute, told me, and I quote it in the book, Unstoppable, where he says, I'm against, I'll quote him exactly. He said, Ralph, I oppose all corporate subsidies, unconstitutional wars, the Patriot Act, and the Federal Reserve run amok. I said, that's a pretty good start. Empire, bloated military budgets, huge waste, contracting abuses, corporate crime, and we're increasing the ferocity of violence against us. We're metastasized. It's not like it's working. It's spreading into one country after another, a quagmire. The lesson of empires throughout history is that eventually they all devour themselves. All empires devour themselves because they bleed their domestic necessities and their domestic resources in moving throughout the world to impose their will. And so I was very pleased in 2010 to see Congressman Ron Paul join with Congressman Barney Frank, can you imagine, into a caucus to challenge the bloated military budget. That is a major area of future convergence, and that will deal with a great deal of effect with the integrity of our public budgets and the disposition of our taxpayer resources. 2 days ago, a major study that came out on corporate welfare, company by company, tremendous breakthrough, and you can get it free on goodjobsfirst.org. It's called goodjobsfirst.org. And 3 days ago, there was a left-right convergence that defeated in West Virginia an attempt by oil and gas companies to get eminent domain to seize farmers' land if they wouldn't sell it voluntarily. That was defeated in the last 24 hours before a certain victory for the oil and gas company, because the word went out on the internet and left-right poured their opposition as citizens on the legislature, the House in Charleston, and it deadlocked 49-49 and defeated this eminent domain. Another area of convergence by left-right. Thank you very much.
Truly fascinating stuff. And if you're thoroughly confused as to, at this point in time, as to why Ralph Nader was saying things that sound like Grover Norquist, just wait, because you'll be completely lost when Grover Norquist comes up here next and starts talking about things that are going to make him sound like Ralph Nader. So without further ado, Mr. Grover Norquist.
Whenever somebody says, without further ado, I always want to say, well, that was very good ado that you did. But it's very interesting that we're having a number of bipartisan right-left alliances and coalitions just at the time that all the establishment media's decided that there is this gridlock, partisan gridlock in Washington, D.C., and they're both sort of right. In Washington, D.C., on the mega issues, big issues, are we going to raise taxes or cut taxes, spend more, spend less, more regulations, less regulations, we have gridlock. We have a party that wants to go in one direction, a party that wants to go the other direction, and for the next 2 years, on much of what Washington does, and in some states, you have gridlock. You have two sumo wrestlers that are absolutely the same size, and they're just going to sort of bounce into each other for 2 years, and nobody knocks anybody outside the red circle. And it's just going to keep going like that. And the reason for that, and then everyone says, our establishment press friends say, I wish we had that old bipartisan compromise. And I want to make it very clear, the right-left alliance we're talking about is not bipartisan compromise. Bipartisan compromise is what politicians, people talk about. It basically tells you how old they are. They remember back in the 50s and so on, when the two political parties didn't mean anything in terms of their worldview or their ideology or their principles. It was all about region. If you were born north of the Mason-Dixon line, you were Republican. If you were born south of the Mason-Dixon line, you were Democrat. And there were little old ladies in Mississippi who agreed with Ronald Reagan on everything and voted for George McGovern because Sherman had been unpleasant to Atlanta recently. The other part about the bipartisan compromise of yesteryear, and I want to differentiate it from the right-left alliance that Ralph and I engage on a number of issues, is it's very easy for Nixon and Ted Kennedy to compromise. Nixon, every year, would come down and want a bigger budget. Ted Kennedy would want a much bigger budget. And they could do this compromise between bigger and much bigger, which was bigger. And they would do this again and again and again. Compromise. Next year we come back, we compromise again, always in the same direction. after a while, you get further and further out, and the government gets bigger and bigger. You can imagine those of us who would like to see a more limited government are not terribly interested in bipartisan compromise between Nixon and Kennedy. But during the Reagan lifetime, the two parties sorted themselves out, so they actually do have a series of principles which, if you want to find agreement between right and left, you'd better understand what are the principles that motivate them, and how do you find a Venn diagram that allows those principles to overlap and get progress. Now, I want to make it clear, I'm in favor of compromise in the sense that compromise means getting towards liberty slower than I'd like to. I realize there are other people in the room, and we have to take that into account, and we can't move towards liberty as quickly as I want. If we're trying to get from Washington, D.C. to California, getting to West Virginia is not treason, it's on the way. But if your feet are wet and everybody around you is speaking French, you have not been compromising, you've been losing. You've been going in the wrong direction. And so we can't ask people of principle to use the word compromise as a alternative for losing and giving up your principles. So that is the old understanding of compromise, which is two people get together and both do something they wish they hadn't. That's not what we're focused on here. Where, Ralph, Nader and I and guys on the right and the left have been able to agree is where, for our own principled reasons, we can come together on the same issue. Ralph went through a number of those topics. Right on crime, the idea that conservatives are starting to look at the criminal justice system and say, do we need this many people in prison for this long? How much does it cost? How much does it cost in terms of lives? Families disrupted, the families of victims, the families of criminals themselves who end up being deprived of parents for a great period of time. How do we reduce the cost of fighting crime and punishing crime while maintaining the constant drive towards reducing the crime rate in the United States? And there have been some very serious successes at the state level. Started in Texas, which is kind of interesting. If you want to move an idea which on crime, and a lot of politicians, Republicans and Democrat, right and left, live in fear of being called soft on crime, and they want to make sure that it's safe, and by safe it means somebody can win the next election. That's a safe issue. Knowing that it came from Texas is a big help. When I testified in Florida in the legislature and I said they did this in Texas a number of years ago, all of a sudden they perked up. Texas, and a number of years ago, means there's been an intervening election. So now all of a sudden they were very interested in it. If it was a good idea that came from Vermont, I'm not sure it would translate and be picked up in the same way. Ralph also mentioned civil liberties. We run a center-right meeting in Washington, D.C. About 150 people get together. Ralph has been by. He sat next to Phyllis Schlafly, and they hated free trade together. It was great. We get together, 150 center-right conservatives of all sorts. And during the Clinton years, the ACLU came and asked if they could come talk to us about something Clinton was doing. And at first there were these giggles of, oh, the ACLU's here. And then the second time the ACLU came by and talked about another power grab. These are baby Patriot Acts that Clinton was trying to push. The second time. Then the third time they said, okay, what's he up to now? And there was an understanding that the ACLU has certain civil libertarian issues, as does the right. We both are worried that the government can get too big, that would decide to eat one or other or both of us. And so there is this understanding that perhaps a more limited government makes life safer for everybody. Defense reform is another issue. Again, not everybody agrees for all the same reasons. A number of conservatives think we need more muscle in the military, which means less fat. And perhaps that we could spend less money, but save it not by cutting the number of soldiers, but by the number of people who don't wear a uniform, the Pentagon civil service, civilian employees there. There's actual legislation, Calvert, Republican from California, has put together to, over the next several years, drop that by 15%, phasing it in, to bring us back to the ratios we used to have of more soldiers and fewer bureaucrats per soldier in the United States. It's gotten out of whack over the last decade or so. That's an idea. Liberals say, let's let's reduce that waste in the Pentagon, and then they may have ideas about how to spend it. I have very interesting conversations with our friends from the NAACP and other groups when we are on the same podium talking about spending less money incarcerating people and spending less money trying to come up with more effective ways to manage parole and probation. And they have dollar signs in their eyes about all this money they're going to save because they want to give it to the teachers' unions. And I think perhaps we should leave it with the taxpayers. But we can agree you don't have to waste it. Then you can have a discussion about what one does with savings there. The other issue that I really think has been very helpful and has been very big in Missouri is transparency. I think Ralph and I first started talking about this early on in the Bush administration, and we went over and talked to the folks there about, guys, how about, since Al Gore invented the internet, how about we put all of the government spending online, all contracts. So you can look at a contract and see, so what was the company supposed to do, or a grant recipient, what were they supposed to do, what did they do, and all the competitors to that company can look and say, wait a minute, they padded things, how could you bid lower the next time around, and making sure that we know how every dollar is spent. Now, again, we may have slightly different views. Ralph thinks if everybody understood exactly how the federal government was spending their money, they'd go, Martha, that's great, let's send more of our money in. I tend to think that taxpayers might look at all how they're spending the money and say, this is ridiculous, let's cut taxes and spend less in that zone. But we can both agree that citizens have the right to know every dollar being spent. The idea that every piece of legislation, before it's enacted or voted on, should be online for at least 3 days, some say 7 days. The American people, if you poll them, talk about more than 2 weeks, so that everybody can read it, and then Congress can decide to have a vote. But in the old days, lobbyists would get in, and maybe they'd get a FedExed package about what a bill looked like. Maybe they'd get it before it passed. But the American people had no ability to check something quickly or to have people that they trust look and read a bill and parse it and decide what was in it. I don't think a lot of the bills that have passed in the last 2 decades would have passed, not the 3,000-page ones, if people had been able to look at them and say, wait a minute, what about this? What about this? Instead of finding out about it later and asking the courts to interpret, what do you think they meant? Maybe we should ask them to write the bills in the first place in a useful way. Term limits is another issue, and again, right and left for different reasons, like the idea of term limits, limiting the number of years that somebody can serve in state legislature, governorship, presidency, 2 terms, House and Senate in Washington, D.C. Certainly it does a whole bunch of good things. It brings in new people. It reduces the corruption, because corruption takes time for people to get to know each other and be friends and know you can trust the other guy. He won't mention what you're doing because you won't mention what he's doing. And if you're all going to be there for 20 years, you're going to have to get along. But if you're only there for 6 or 8 years, you go, hey, look at what he's doing. And so it really tamps down the opportunities for corruption. I don't know about, I can't speak for Ralph, but the least successful press conference I was ever involved in my entire life was with Ralph Nader a couple weeks before we passed 12 or 15 term limit measures across the country. It was a press conference. We're about to win term limits in more than a dozen states. We won them with an average vote of 70% across the country. Not a single press person in Washington, D.C. turned up to hear about what was going on in the country that would pass with 70% support. They didn't know, they didn't care, it wasn't on their list of things to focus on. But it's, again, this has to be a left-right alliance. The mushy middle is where you get bipartisan compromise, meaning everybody's unhappy with the deal and everybody sacrifices principle if any of those guys in the mushy middle had principles. On the right and the left, you have people who say, look, here's the principle, here's what we're talking about, here's what we're trying to accomplish, and here's why on this bill, people on the right and the left, from auditing the Pentagon to auditing the Fed, to criminal justice reform, to transparency, to term limits, to an end to earmarks, to an end to corruption, to cronyism, to the government handing money out to different people, institutions, companies. We can agree, for different reasons, to work together on this issue. The reason why the mushy middle can't do the big issues is that they created the present mess. They gave us the status quo. all of the stuff that Ralph and I object to here, starting with corporate bailouts and special deals and cronyism, was created by the mushy middle, Republican and Democrat. It's a bipartisan mess. It's folks on both sides, right and left, who on principle oppose the government stealing people's money and handing it to their friends, okay? It's not a question of, oh, does this work, but is it right? And I can speak to folks on the right and say, this is a good idea and here's why, and Ralph can speak to folks on the left and make the case. The mushy middle, even if they had a good idea, could not be a validator to voters that you can trust them, because they created this mess and they have run on interest, not on principle, when they run for election and re-election. So one, there are a lot of issues that we don't have bipartisan compromise anymore, and I'm glad, because that was just drifting left. But there are a number of very important, it's not minor issues, very important issues that I think can lead to right and left working together to actually come up with real changes, with real success, to enact laws to make the government more transparent, more honest, clearer, a better informed electorate that can make better decisions, better informed decisions on all issues, starting with this list where there is right-left coalition possibilities. Thank you.
Thank you very much, both of you. That was an excellent framing of the debate. And for those of you who are also confused as to what I'm doing here, I would like to say that I am here because of some people who I have become very close with over the last few months as I rode off into the sunset after being the Speaker of the House and a state legislator. You know, my friends on the right were afraid that I would ride off into the sunset and then maybe primary them someday in some future election. My friends on the left were hoping I would ride off into the sunset and get hit by a bus. But instead, I'm here, and I'm here in thanks to Dr. Evans, to Dr. Wall, and Dr. Duchamp, because one of my new titles is I am the first Senior Policy Fellow here at the Hammond Institute at Lindenwood, and I want to thank them very much for including me in this exciting new venture. It is not even 2 years old, the Institute, the Hammond Institute here at Lindenwood, and we've already had some marquee events with some marquee national people, and I can tell you, I'll tease this for you, there's a lot more and incredible things coming down the line. So I want to thank them very much for having me here today. Now, before I get to the discussion, you know, we have a lot of young people in the audience and a lot of young people at heart, and I can tell you that every single one of us who have been at this microphone understand the importance of social media. So if you want to keep up with us after this event, Mr. Norquist, Mr. Nader, Jamie Allman, and I all have Twitter handles. I believe we're also on Facebook as well. I'm not going to run through those handles. I learned a trick the other day. If you Google someone's name and the word Twitter, you'll find out if they're on or not. So you can follow us and continue the discussion with us there. Let me start off by, let me ask Grover a question first about, you know, if from a conservative point of view, some Republicans may say, you know, on the federal level, and Grover and I have talked about this before, so much of the federal budget is taken up with the social spending, with the welfare spending. Medicaid and Social Security are the lion's share of the budget. You throw in defense spending, and there's really not much room for anything else. From personal experience on the state level, I can tell you it's very similar to that. You take out the budget we have for social services here in the state of Missouri. Education is the next biggest bucket of money. There's not much money left for anything else. So if you're a conservative or a Republican, you say, we've had decades of the New Deal and of all of the war on poverty and all these wonderful programs for people. Not that we shouldn't be helping people in need, but the government doesn't do it well. So what harm is it for those of us who run businesses or support business or who like business owners? Shouldn't they get a little piece of the pie? What's a few million here and a few million there, as we say in Jefferson City? In D.C., it's a trillion or gazillion here and there. So, Grover, what is the big evil behind crony capitalism?
Sure. I think it's very similar to earmarks in Washington, D.C., where we actually got a ban on most earmarks, where Congress would do an earmark for some local project, some company. And earmarks were only a few $billion, maybe tens of billions of dollars in a trillions of dollar budget. But if everyone in the store is shoplifting, nobody's paying attention to the embezzler, you can't habituate elected officials to the idea that you can take a little bit here and give it to your friends and then ask them to have any fiscal discipline on the rest of the budget because, among other things, they know they're kind of guilty about it. So I think that earmarks and government grants to businesses, cronyism, are the broken windows of government overspending. It may not be the biggest budget item in the budget, and depending on how you describe or define some of the cronyism, it can get pretty large in terms of dollar amounts. I think you go after the most vulnerable spending programs, and that is the cronyism, that is the earmarks. They have the fewest defenders when focused on. And I think it's been very helpful. I mean, there has been, we worry about how come there's no change in Washington, D.C. In the last few years, since 2010, we have taken the culture and turned it upside down. It used to be that people bragged about earmarks. It was a sign, if you were a congressman or senator, of your virility. You were bringing all this stuff, you know, an antelope back to the village. You look at this, I am bringing you it all eat now. And you should like me because I brought a bunch of money and I gave it to somebody who lives near you. That's what an earmark is. And you're supposed to be excited about that. But it was. People put it in their obituaries as congressmen and senators, that they were very well known for bringing back pork, and that was considered a good thing. Today, it's up there with farting at the dinner table. You'd never talk about it. These people act like they never did it, and they certainly won't do it in the future. So we went from something being seen as virtuous to being understood to be semi-criminal. And so when people say, can you do ... some of the projects that Ralph and I have worked on, the answer is, if we did that with earmarks, it's got to be possible to make more success.
Wonderful. Excellently stated. Mr. Nader, Ralph, you, throughout your entire career, I've noticed you've always appealed to young people. You've always appealed to that younger generation, no matter what decade it's been in. And we're here on a university campus, which I think is fantastic. A lot of young folks in the audience that I saw coming in. Ralph, why should millennials, why should the younger generations care about this topic? What does it matter to them? Why should they be engaged on this issue?
Well, if it matters to them that they want their public facilities upgraded, roads, bridges, schools renovated, sewage water, drinking water systems up to par so you don't have contaminated drinking water, public transit that's efficient and gets you where you want to go so you don't have to be in congested traffic, that's one reason. Another reason is you know, what Grover said about the culture changing in Washington, it hasn't changed at the local and state area in terms of taxpayers being required to subsidize stadiums, ballparks, arenas, and in place like, and the politicians brag about that. Yes, yes. And in a place like Cleveland, they had $300 million to build some stadium. And at the same time, the high schools had to abandon a lot of high school sports, and there wasn't enough money to build neighborhood recreational facilities. Up in Seattle, Paul Allen, who is worth $21 billion, he's a Microsoft investor from the beginning, he paid for his own election. He actually paid for opening the voting booths in June of one year in order to get $300 million to build the Seahawks Stadium. And the legislators went along. They said, Paul, as long as you're paying for all the workers for this special election. We went up to fight him. He had media all tied up. We couldn't get any radio, TV, or print at our news conference. But still, he only won by 51%. But you see, that another area of conversion, Mr. Jones, is initiative, referendum, recall. Both sides want that. That's called direct democracy. When the politicians turn their back on the people, the voters can vote their own laws in, repeal laws, or recall a politician. So if you're looking for your future jobs and your future healthy environment, if you're looking for efficiency in the way you use your time when you go out of your home and you got to get from place to place, if you want to have drinking water that's safe, that's why you want to take these budgets that are going to these big corporations and are draining tax money that should only be used for necessities, not for sports entertainment, not for frivolous things that the corporations get you to pay for. That's why this report, Good Jobs First, is called Uncle Sam's Favorite Corporations, identifying the large companies by name that dominate federal subsidies. It's just out. No one's ever put this together. You can get it free from goodjobsfirst.org.
Excellent. Grover, Ralph touched on this by giving us some specific examples. And we've been framing the debate very well at the outer limits, the theoretical sense, and diving in a little deeper. You're in the Beltway, for better or for worse, on a frequent basis. So can you tell us? And this is I know that here in Missouri we have very active grassroots people on both the right and the left. I heard from them for 8 years straight. Sometimes they love me, sometimes not so much. But I heard from them. And so people here in Missouri, and I know all across the country, are very engaged. And so I bet these folks want to hear about what is happening right now in D.C., and then if you know of any examples in the states, what is the capital cronyism going on in D.C. right now? Are there specific bills being secretly navigated through by K Street? What do people need to be, what do they need to know about right now?
Sure. You're talking about bad things moving forward. They're going to try and re-up the XM Bank, and whether you can get it completely gone away or shrunk in size as some sort of first step. I think there's an opportunity to get the right and the left to both say, it's not the taxpayer's job to subsidize Boeing or other companies. And that's one that kind of jumps out there. You see at the local level, the whole Uber versus taxi fight. And there are a whole series of laws which restrict innovation, make it difficult for Ubers, and by Uber I mean all of the various new efforts that have different structures. The unionized taxi cab, medallionized rules, you can't be a taxi driver because we say so. That's breaking through. And on the culture thing, I think people root for Uber. And frankly, it's improved the taxi cabs too. I mean, they've caught up and improved a great deal in DC and other states. And when you go to a city that doesn't have Uber, it's like showing up in some country that doesn't have running water. You go, what happened here? So it is going to spread, but you see that also people staying at other people's homes and Lyft and a number of other opportunities where the government doesn't want something new to happen until they can figure out how to raise campaign contributions off it because they're used to the old structure, and people are just breaking ahead and doing it. Okay, Uber didn't ask for permission. Uber just started up. By the time they had several thousand customers in Washington, D.C., when the D.C. Taxi Commission said, we're now going to shut you down, the phones lit up, and there was a constituency for liberty, for people having that freedom. So at the local level, I see Uber versus taxi cab again and again and again, Lyft and others. But there's some specific unfortunate things moving forward in Washington. Yes. Ralph's got an entire list.
More examples.
The big thing that's going on in Washington is they keep allowing all these subsidies to go on year after year without challenging them. In other words, once they get a subsidy in, like subsidizing marketing overseas for McDonald's, or subsidizing agribusiness against the interests of small farmers, they don't have to renew these laws. These laws continue year after year unless they're repealed. So what's going on in Washington is they're not repealing. They're not repealing these laws. So the corporate subsidy state continues unchallenged in every department, almost every department and agency. There are so many of these corporate welfare programs No one has ever put them together in a report for about 40 years. They can't keep track of them. The only people who know where they are the corporate lobbyists who've got their hand in the trough.
And that's why transparency is so helpful.
Exactly.
With transparency, outside groups can go in and accumulate this and put it together into reports.
This is just what this is. I debated Ronald Reagan once and in Washington, and I said, this is before he was president, and I said, Mr. Reagan, you know, you're an arch supporter of the free enterprise system, free markets. What do you think of all these corporations who you speak to around the country who are getting subsidies, handouts, giveaways, bailouts? And he looked at me and he said, you know, I keep telling them to get their hand out of the Washington trough. But then when he became president, he was caught up in the same web. And he supported or didn't challenge all of these corporate. Now, out there in the country, there's a massive consensus, left, right. They don't like this stuff, but they haven't organized politically to move into the media, into the electoral, into the political arena. And maybe you can agree with me on this, Mr. Jones. If there's anything a politician fears the most, is a wave coming toward them that's left-right. They can deal with the left, they can deal with the right, but when a left-right comes into their office, that's power.
That's when we run for the hills, yes.
Huh?
That's right, absolutely. Well stated. Follow up for you, Mr. Nader, on that point. On the state level, those of us here who have, there's been a big debate, definitely in Missouri, and I think probably in others, I'm sure in other states as well, is this issue, the specific issue of tax credits. Tax credits. Yeah. Now, that's a big issue. There's a lot of different tax credits. I think in Missouri we have 57 programs, and some people don't like any of them, some people like some of them, some people like all of them. Some people can make a case for why you should have one or the other. There's a difference between benevolent tax credits for charitable uses and the economic ones. Talk about tax credits. Do you despise all of them? Do you think some of them have uses? Is there ever a place for them?
Well, tax credits are pushed through, often secretly, with inadequate public hearings in Washington by corporate lobbyists. They swarm all over Capitol Hill. And this is an area that is very complex, and by the way, there's a corporate tax lawyer who taught the first course on taxation in a college in the country, in Mount Holyoke, and now he's teaching high school students. He said, how can students go to school without learning about taxation? And he says the high school students get it. Don't say it's too complex. Anyway, on these credits, there are two types. One is where you get a credit for all business, let's say. It's uniform. The bigger types of tax credits and tax expenditures, loopholes, as they're called, tax breaks, are to whoever has more influence in Washington. Like General Electric has far more tax loopholes than an ordinary company with 1,000 workers in Missouri. Now, I think Grover thinks that uniform tax breaks are good because it reduces taxation. I don't know where he is on discriminatory tax breaks, but I know one thing, that it is draining the tax base. When you said that entitlements, et cetera, are the biggest part of the budget, how many buildings in St. Louis and other places, big buildings that are tax abated, or they pay only a small share? New York City is full of them. Chicago is full of them. They're not labeled, though. But if they don't pay, say, $200,000 in property tax, you own a home here, you pay, you don't get an abatement. So either you're going to pay more or get less government service, less roads paved or whatever, or you're going to get rid of their abatements, and so you have a more uniform tax system. This is where the yuck factor comes in. One of the things that keeps left-right from converging is that our side has a yuck factor and the conservatives have a yuck factor. By the way, we're both up against corporate Republicans and corporate Democrats. That's who we're up against. And the yuck factor is, I'm going to work with Grover Norquist. He wants to get rid of all taxes. I mean, who's going to pay for all the public services and all the things that we can't do for ourselves? And Grover would say, you know, I'm not going to speak for Grover, but someone else would say, I don't want to work with a liberal. That liberal is for abortion. That liberal is for school prayer. Well, here's my approach. We're going to disagree on A, B, C, D. If we agree on W, X, Y, Z, and we're an unstoppable majority, and we can transform the country for the better, and we can change these crazy political alignments for the better, for the future, for posterity, we've got to do it. It's a moral obligation.
Grover, I know you had a point to make on this issue of tax credits. It's a huge, complex issue, as Ralph points out. So what say you?
Well, two things. When you can reduce rates and broaden the base, as Reagan did in '86, that tends to be better for the economy than having tax credits or even deductions. There is a bill that I am very happy with, Pompeo has from Kansas, that gets rid of all targeted tax credits in the energy industry and reduces rates for all companies like by half a point or something, whatever, a point, whatever it adds up to. It's revenue neutral, doesn't raise taxes or reduce taxes, but it gets rid of all of the targeted tax credits. I think that's a good model.
Very good. So we are going to wrap up here in a minute. I do have one or two more follow-up questions, but just to remind you all, if anybody came in late, Dr. Howard Wall, who's the director of the Hammond Institute here at Lindenwood, is up here to my right. I think he's still there. Yeah, he's still there. He just waved something at me. He is up here, and if you all have questions you would like to submit to either or both of our panelists, please scratch something down and give it to Howard, and he will be directing the audience participation part of this in just a moment. So, gentlemen, as we wrap up the last few minutes of our discussion here, so what? This sounds like such a gigantic problem, national in scope in all the 50 states. What can an individual do? What can someone do? Grover, I'll start with you. How can these people get further engaged on it? Besides buying Mr. Nader's book.
They can buy my book.
They can buy his book too. That's right. Coming out April 7th, yes.
Well, what's interesting is with email, with social media, one person can communicate with a lot of people. You can do your own letter to the editor without asking permission of a newspaper. The ability, if you have an interesting idea, if you've got a couple of friends, but just yourself, begin to communicate it and begin to learn how to communicate it in 140 characters. There are so many opportunities now that it's not, you don't need a license to become a political activist. There's no school you have to go to. You don't need a diploma. You don't have to, do X number of hours of something to get that permit license. You can just do it. My favorite cartoon in the whole world is a Far Side cartoon where these two cavalrymen out west are in the fort and these flaming arrows are coming in at them, and one says to the other, "The Indians are lighting their arrows on fire. Can they do that?" Yes, you can do it, and just start. And you'll find if you get the ball rolling, I do think that people will sooner rather than later, react to subsidies for sports stadiums as they do now towards earmarks. The idea of handing tens of millions of dollars to billionaires to help build their playthings strikes me as one of the oddest things in the world. People hold hostage your interest in the sport. I will not, that I don't think stands at the end of the day.
Yes. And hardly a coincidence that it's happening right here now in our region.
Yeah, I think it's easier than we think to turn this around. First of all, if we had civic skill courses in colleges where you learned how to be a skilled citizen, a skilled voter, a skilled taxpayer, you'd learn a lot about the economy, but you won't have to swallow your grievances and not know how to fight City Hall or ExxonMobil when you graduate. So I hope if you don't have a civic skill course here that you put one in. I know a lot of your faculty would be very happy to teach it. How do you use the Free Information Act? Do you know how to build coalitions? How to dig in research on property tax records? How to be resilient? How to share credit? How not to get discouraged? That's all. Now, having said that, here's one thing you can do. No one can stop you from doing this. As Grover said, there are certain things no one can stop you from doing. You get together with some conservative and liberals. You know, almost all of you label yourselves. Too bad. But you get together and you start a letterhead which says liberals and conservatives are left-right against crony capitalism and corporate welfare. And then you write to your members of Congress and to your state legislature. And you ask them pointed questions based on data like this, social media. You ask them questions they don't know the answers to. Like, could you tell me, please, the number of office buildings in St. Louis that are tax abated or other facilities? And when they don't know the answer, and they know you're coming left-right, they're going to have to educate themselves before they reply to your questions. And when you say at the bottom of the letter, CC, many interested parties, they don't know where your letter is going, okay? And so there's a way to write a letter that is 10 times more effective than the usual amateur letter, I protest, I demand. You ask them questions, you say it's going to be facility. One of my favorite PSs is, Senator, if you think only 10 signatures, left, right, are not enough, we can get 100 in about a week. Just tell us. Just ask us for 100. The senator says, oh, these people are real networkers. We better respond. Once you do this letterhead, left-right opposition, it's going to grow. You're going to find more and more people who want to be on your letterhead and who want to be your social media. And then you give it to the local member of Congress office, not just the senator in Washington, but they have offices throughout Missouri. And so they know that you know. They know that you are skilled. You are going to persist. You're not going to be blown off by some robo letter from some senator that doesn't answer your request. Now, can anybody stop you from doing that? If you had a course called Congress 101, and every semester you studied your 2 senators and representatives and disseminated all the grim results to everybody in the state, you would become the most important factor in that politician's life because you're tracking everything that politician is doing. The votes, the absentee, the fundraising parties, who they ignore, how they deal with the constituents, etc. It's simple. It's easier than you think to turn this country around. It just takes 1% of the population or less representing majority opinion, like left-right, 1% organized in congressional districts with about as much fervor and time as a serious group of bird watchers. And you can turn the Congress around. I've been around a long time. I'm not sugarcoating you on this. We turned Congress around with a few dozen people, but we represented the public will out there for coal miner health and safety, for auto safety, for clean food. Didn't matter whether they were conservatives and liberals. They want clean food. They want auto safety. They want breathable air. So just don't grow up feeling powerless. Then you'll make excuses for yourself as to why you will continue to be powerless. Congress 101, civics course, letterhead. Let's hear from you.
2 intellectual giants who do some good stand-up as well. As they point out, this has as much to do with you as it does with them. You all can get engaged in this discussion. You can buy their books so you're armed with the knowledge you need. You can follow them on social media. You can listen to Jamie Allman on FM News Talk 97.1 or ABC 30. I got all my plugs in. See, that was good. And you can become a friend of the Hammond Institute here at Lindenwood. So, Dr. Howard Wall, I will now turn it over to you for our audience participation piece of this program. And who do we hear from first?
Oh, well, I didn't collect names, or people didn't give me names.
We have questions, though.
But we do have questions on by various media. So here's a question about, so I picked this one because I'm trying to get a wedge between you on something that maybe you should agree on, but maybe not. And the question that someone gave me was, what are your opinions on the crony green jobs in the USA?
The environmental economy. So, Ralph, let's let you tackle that one first, and then we'll go to Grover.
Oh, they're asking you for...
Oh, me?
Yes.
Crony green jobs?
Cronyism in green jobs.
That's very good, because not all subsidies are bad. Not all subsidies are bad. There are certain...
We found our wedge.
And in my book, I talk about criteria. Most of them are bad, because there's a subject of special pleading. But if we've got a real problem in this world that some people dispute, of climate change, of pollution on the ground, of wasteful energy use, which hits your pocketbook, do we want a national policy or a local policy or a state policy that will use some tax funds under rigorous monitoring so that you can get more fuel efficiency and therefore have less pollution, which comes from fuel inefficiency, and less greenhouse gases in terms of climate? I would say yes. But the subsidies overwhelmingly are going to coal, oil, gas, and nuclear. See? And not, by the way, and not forever, the so-called infant industry. Because they're starting the solar industry up against all these other fossil fuel nuclear that have been loaded for 70 years with government taxpayer subsidies and advantages as a result, windfalls.
Grover, difference between subsidy and cronyism?
I don't see one. But look, every time, the government never introduces itself as the government. Please give me, not please, please give me more power over your life. Please give me more control over your life. Please give me more of your money. The government always shows up like one of those characters in a fairy tale. Oh, I'm goodness and light, and you should contribute to fill in the blank, and green is one of them. Isis, the ancient Egyptian god, people would bring food and put it in front of Isis, the statue, and they'd go away, and Isis would absorb the essence of the food, and then the high priest would come out and eat it. And government grows by telling you should make a sacrifice in the name of, fill in the blank of what this year's favorite thing is, and then you put it in, and the thing that you put it in for green stuff or education or mass transit or whatever gets the essence of it, and then the unions come out and eat it. So, of course, all of these things are introduced with nice words and promises. No government ever grew by going, we're going to do really wicked things to you, so give us power and we'll beat you up. That doesn't work very well.
Dr. Wall.
All right, I have another one. Again, I think I succeeded in picking that one to get a bit of a wedge. Another one is by my same motivation.
Can you get closer to the mic?
Oh, sure. So, it's not just corporate cronyism, but also union cronyism. For example, the Davis-Bacon Act and other things that make public works more expensive and government more expensive. Isn't that also cronyism?
Let's start with Grover. Unionism, sure. Union cronyism.
I'm never in favor of insisting that everything be put into a particular silo that we're talking about. So, anyway, whether you want to mean cronyism, is it bad, the Davis-Bacon Act? Yes, it's evil. It's also racist. I mean, the Davis-Bacon Act was put in with a deliberate racist reason to keep black workers from coming up and competing with white union jobs. And so they put what the South Africans would call a prevailing wage to keep new guys out who didn't have the training because they didn't want them to get the training. And it raises the cost of building a road or a bridge or anything the government builds. Some people say 25, 30%, but not zero. When the states have mini Davis-Bacon Acts, and reforming that in Ohio allowed you to build 11 schools for the price of 10. So reforming, not eliminating, the Ohio mini Davis-Bacon was 11% of the cost of something. So, yeah, I mean, that's deliberately designed. It was deliberately designed to keep certain people out of jobs. I went and talked to a legislator who wanted to raise the gas tax, and I said, why don't you get rid of the Davis-Bacon Act? I'd like to help you. And he said, do you want all our roads to be built by Hispanics? So the racist Davis-Bacon Act remains racist, they just have a different target this time.
Ralph, any comment on Davis-Bacon Act? Do you see any union cronyism out there? Your opinions on that?
Unions are not foreign to corruption. We fought corruption in the early United Mine Workers, Teamsters. In the construction industry, there often is this corrupt compact between developers with great influence in City Hall and construction unions. And they're corrupt in different ways, and they agree to be corrupt. So we should look at it in that context. Both the unions and the developers have cut a deal against, years ago, the jobs were hereditary, right? I mean, your son took your place in a construction union, not exactly meritorious. However, the developers have a huge responsibility as well. They're busy trying to get all kinds of windfalls from City Hall. The New York Stock Exchange persuaded New York City about 10 years ago. Listen to this, the bastion of capitalism. They wanted a new headquarters in Manhattan, and they persuaded the mayor and the governor to give them $1 billion building with tax abatements and support, direct support for facilities. The only thing that stopped this, can you imagine any greater hypocrisy than that? The only thing that stopped it was the recession and automation. They needed less space, the brokers. That's how far they'll go. You know, capitalism is defined by a number of principles which these big corporations violate. One, if you own something, you're supposed to control it reasonably. Shareholders have virtually no control over management of these big corporations. They're just told, you don't like how we enrich ourselves at the top, Buster? Sell your shares. If you're supposed to have freedom to fail. That's another principle of capitalism. Freedom to fail, these big corporations, they don't go bankrupt unless they go to Washington to bail them out. They don't fail. Think of what that does to small business. If you're afraid of your savings, are you going to put your money in a community bank that's free to fail? Or are you going to put it in the Bank of America that's too big to fail? See how unfair it is? So a lot of times it takes two to tango, the union and the corporation. That's what we faced during the fight with United Mine Workers, that the coal mine operators were in it just as thick and corrupt.
Dr. Wall.
Another question is, do you think there's something structurally wrong with the political system, that maybe some campaign finance reform or political finance reform, since money is from corporations, or is it counterproductive because that will shut off outside voices getting funding from non-corporations, or what are your views on that?
Ralph, we'll start with you. Mr. Nader.
Yeah,
yes.
this is where we may differ. I'm for a voluntary $300 checkoff on the tax return. You don't have to give anything, but you can give up to $300 into a public election trust fund. If we have public parks, public taxpayer dollars, public elections, public taxes, and a certain amount of free time on our property for ballot qualified candidates on radio and TV. So we own. We're the landlords. The radio and TV stations are the tenants. They decide who gets on, who doesn't, 24 hours a day, and pay us no rent. It's free. So we're saying we want to give ballot qualified candidates some free time on radio and TV so they don't have to grub before commercial and other interests in order to run for office. So it is voluntary, and it's a reversion of a tiny bit of time on the public airways before elections to convey their particular positions.
Yeah, this is an area where there's going to be some disagreement, although many liberals agree. My objection is to the use of stolen money in politics. I think one of the best things that happened to the country was when Governor Scott Walker of Wisconsin said, if you're a public sector worker, if you're a teachers union member, teacher in Wisconsin, you were made $50,000 a year, you were paying $1,000 in dues, and you had to. It was taken out of your pay, you never saw it, you didn't have a choice in the matter. And he said, you know what, the government can't take that out of your paycheck, and it's voluntary. And at least 88,000 government workers in Wisconsin said, I don't want to pay $1,000 here. That's a low number because not all the unions are reporting their loss in membership. But it's roughly $100 million a year that was taken by force without the people are now telling you they didn't want to do. And much of that money went into politics. So I'm all in favor of voluntary contributions by people who earn the money voluntarily in politics if they want to, and but not money that's taken by force away from people, spent without their permission.
Very good.
Well, we're entering into the conflict zone.
That's right. That's right.
Here.
Yeah.
And would you have shareholders have the same right? I mean, you know, they do vote for the unions, and these people who are resisting that you mentioned, they get all the benefits of the union without paying the dues. But if they don't want their dues going to politics, union dues, and shareholders, mutual funds, pension funds who own big shares, should be able to say to corporations, you're not going to use Citizens United on my back. You're not going to use my money. It's my money, okay? So this is a conflict zone.
Well, as you can imagine, these two gentlemen are tightly scheduled, and we've kept on a tight schedule, so we have time for one more question, if you have one you want to throw out here, and then we'll wrap it up with Jamie Ullman here in just a second.
All right, I'll choose one that might have short answers, and that is, what do you think about the no labels movement?
The no labels movement.
Yeah. I like the existence of the no labels movement because, and here we're good. What it means is the Republican brand, which is now, we won't raise your taxes. We have 95% of all Republicans in Congress and the Senate have made a commitment never to raise your taxes, which means when they see a problem, they'll reform government to cost less, not raise taxes to paper it over. That's a powerful brand. And people who can't sell the alternative brand go, in our pharmacy, we're not going to have any labels. And so you just come in and we'll tell you what's inside. I like labels. I want to know when I vote for an elected official what his or her principles and rules are, which is why I invented the pledge, to let you know whether a politician will raise your taxes when there's a problem or reform government when there's a problem. So I think no labels, they're all men and women of the left, by the way, that run the no labels thing. They're not conservatives in the no labels movement because they think the labels they presently have, no one would buy their product. So they want to sell it under no labels. Those of us who have labeled ourselves correctly as people who will not raise your taxes but will reform government, we like labels because they win elections for the candidates who self-identify that way. It's like when you're playing tennis with somebody and they're not doing very well and they say, let's not keep score, okay? The no labels movement is a sign of the left's failure to communicate.
Mr. Nader, labels, no labels?
I think the group is a little, it's hard to figure out. They're just a compromised group. I think Grover made a very important point. This left-right convergence is not splitting the difference. Like the right wants 500 F-35 fighters, the left wants none because they're not needed. So let's split the difference. It's transpartisan. That is, we take principled positions that happen to be the same and combine forces to be unstoppable. I don't see no labels doing that. But Grover's a perfect example of how it takes far less than 1% to grab 95% of the Republicans by the neck and have them take a no tax pledge. But I want them to take another pledge. I want them to take a pledge to root out the massive corporate waste, fraud, and abuse in the federal budget and corporate welfare. If you can do that, Nobel Prize is yours.
Well, and that's why it is the emerging right-left alliance to dismantle the corporate state. Let's give our two excellent presenters another big round of applause. Thank you again to Lindenwood University, to the Hammond Institute, to 97.1, and especially to Jamie Ullman, who's going to wrap things up.
Thank you. Tim Jones, thank you very much. Great job. And gentlemen, again, thank you very much for the common sense. We appreciate it very much. And thank you all for coming. We're going to have more of these, so make sure you stay tuned. Out in the lobby, Mr. Nader will be signing copies of his book out in the lobby out there. And also there are a bunch of tables out there of some of the organizations who are behind this event. Thank you again. Have a wonderful evening. Appreciate it very much.